Every trucker has one rule: you don't leave the interstate. But after 12 hours behind the wheel, with one of my buddy's trucks overheating, I got cocky. I saw a town on an old map, Oro Grande, a place that promised a quick fix. My partners trusted me. I led them down a road that felt wrong from the first mile. The company says I suffered a psychotic break from exhaustion, that the town never existed. But they can't explain what happened to the other 2 trucks, or the things I saw in the dark. Judge for yourself. Here's what was waiting for us down Highway 54. My name is Ray, or it was the name on my license. Anyway, I don't feel like that man anymore. That man knew the roads. He knew his rig, a Peterbilt 389, chrome polished to a mirror shine, engine tuned so fine you could hear it breathe. That man had 100,000 miles of confidence under his belt. This man is just the shell that's left. And he's here to tell you a story, so you don't make the same mistake I did. It all started on a stretch of I-10 so flat and empty it feels like God ran out of ideas. West Texas, 3 of us, a tight convoy hauling oversized loads. Me in the lead, a kid named Billy in the swing, and an old hand, Gus, pulling up the drag. We were a well-oiled machine. Our CBs were a constant, easy chatter. Jokes about the four-wheelers weaving between us like panicked mice. Complaints about the heat shimmering off the asphalt. The usual stuff. It was just another Tuesday. Another 1,000 miles to chew up and spit out. The sun was starting to dip, painting the horizon in shades of blood orange and bruised purple. We'd been pushing for 10 hours straight, and the rhythm of the road was hypnotic. The drone of my Cummins, the hiss of the air brakes, the crackle of the radio. That's when it happened. The first wrong note in a perfectly tuned symphony. I saw it in my driver's side mirror first. A pinprick of black, growing fast. Way too fast. Even with us governed at 68, this thing was eating up the distance like it was standing still. I figured it was some rich kid in a supercar, about to do something stupid. I tightened my grip on the wheel, ready for him to fly by. But he didn't. He just appeared. 1 second he was a mile back. The next he was pacing my trailer. A car. A 69 Charger, maybe? All black. So black it seemed to drink the dying sunlight. The windows were tinted to match. Perfect obsidian rectangles. No chrome, no logos, nothing. Just a shape of pure, predatory black. You boys seeing this four-wheeler on my left? I crackled over the CB. Billy's voice, young and tinny, came back first. Negative lead. Got nothing but heat haze back here. Gus. A pause. Then Gus's gravelly voice. Saw the flicker, Ray. Thought it was my eyes playing tricks. He ain't showing on my side. The Charger was right there. I could have reached out and touched it. And the weirdest part? The silence. There was no roar of a V8 engine. No sound of tires on pavement. Nothing. It just glided alongside my rig, a ghost in the twilight. I leaned forward, trying to get a look at the driver, but the window was like looking into a black hole. For a full 10 seconds, it stayed there, perfectly paced with my 40-ton rig. And then it was gone. It didn't accelerate. It just vanished forward. One blink it was there. The next, the road ahead was empty all the way to the horizon. My heart was hammering against my ribs. Did you see that? It just took off. Took off how? Billy asked. I didn't see nothing pass you, man. He's gone, kid. I said, my own voice sounding shaky. Just gone. Gus came on the radio, his tone low and serious. Sun gets in your eyes out here, Ray. Mirage. Let's keep the hammer down. I got a bad feeling brew up. I tried to shake it off. He was right. It had to be a mirage. A trick of the light and a long day. We drove on for another 10, maybe 15 miles. The sky was getting darker. Then Billy's voice came over the radio, laced with panic. Aw, crap. Lead, I'm in trouble. My temp gauge is pegged. I'm cooking over here. I saw his flashers come on in my mirror. We all slowed, a lumbering procession of giants pulling over to the shoulder of the interstate. The silence that fell when we killed our engines was deafening, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the hiss of steam from Billy's grill. The kid was right. He was cooked. Protocol is simple. You call dispatch. You wait for the company mechanic. Doesn't matter if it takes 6 hours or 6 days. You wait. We were in a cellular dead zone, but the sat phone in my cab would work. But we were already behind schedule. Another delay would cost us the bonus on the load. I know a town, I said, more to myself than to them. I pulled out an old paper map, the kind nobody uses anymore. Oro Grande. It's maybe 20 miles off the interstate. Downstate Highway 54. Not much more than a gas station and a greasy spoon, but I remember a guy there. An old-timer who runs a heavy-duty diesel shop out of his barn. But he could get us patched up and on our way before morning. Gus walked up to my cab, his face etched with worry in the glow of the dash lights. Ray, that's a bad idea. We stick to the route. We call it in. You know the rules. Rules? I scoffed, the memory of that silent black car making me feel reckless, edgy. The rules will have us sitting here till sunrise. This is a simple overheat. We can handle it. We'll be back on I-10 in 3 hours tops. I'm making the call. We're going to Oro Grande. Gus just stared at me for a long moment, then looked down the dark, empty stretch of Tulane Highway that was the turnoff for 54. He didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and walked back to his rig. Billy was just happy for a plan. But me, looking at the mouth of that dark road, a cold knot tightened in my gut. I told myself it was just the pressure. It was just a busted radiator hose on a Tuesday night. That was the choice that sealed our fate. The choice that turned a routine haul into a one-way trip to hell. The moment I turned my wheel and led those 2 other trucks off the safety of the interstate and down that forgotten strip of asphalt, that was the moment we were marked. That was the moment the hunt truly began. The air changed the second we turned on a Highway 54. It was heavier, somehow. The last sliver of sun dipped below the horizon, and the darkness that fell wasn't the gentle fade of twilight. It was like someone threw a thick, black blanket over the world. Our headlights cut cones of white into the void, illuminating nothing but cracked asphalt and the occasional skeletal form of a yucca plant. The easy chatter on the CB died. It was like the road itself was demanding silence. 10 miles in, Billy's truck, which we were babying along, finally gave up the ghost. A loud bang, a cloud of steam thick enough to swallow his whole rig, and he rolled to a dead stop. She's done, Ray. She ain't moving another inch, he said over the radio, his voice strained. All right, kid, sit tight, I replied, trying to sound a hell of a lot more confident than I felt. Gus, you stay with him. I'll push on to Oro Grande, find this mechanic, and bring him back. We're in this together. Copy that lead. Gus's voice crackled back, a small comfort in the oppressive quiet. So I drove on alone. The Peterbilt felt cavernous without the familiar voices on the radio. The only sound was the low rumble of my own engine. The road stretched on, straight as a razor's edge, through a landscape of absolute nothing. No lights, no signs of life, just the endless dark. I checked my mirrors out of habit. Empty. I scanned the road ahead. Empty. But the feeling of being watched was a physical presence in the cab. The hairs on my arms stood on end. A cold sweat trickled down my spine. I was spooked, and I hated it. I'm a professional. I don't get spooked. Then I saw it. Up ahead, maybe a quarter mile. A flicker of light. A single, bare bulb hanging over a sign. Oro Grande. Hop, 42. It was hand-painted, the letters faded and peeling. Beneath it, another sign. Sal's Garage. Diesel Repair 24HR. Relief washed over me, so strong my shoulders sagged. I'd been right. This was going to work out. I pulled off the highway onto a gravel lot in front of a long, low building that looked like it was cobbled together from corrugated tin in pure desperation. The single bulb cast long, distorted shadows, making the place look even more derelict. I killed the engine, and the sudden silence was a punch to the gut. I grabbed my mag light and swung down from the cab. The air was still and cold. Too cold for a Texas night. I walked towards the building. A smaller door was set into one of the large bay doors with a grimy window. I peered inside. It was a nightmare of rusted parts and grease-caked tools. Chains hung from the ceiling like gallows. In the center of the concrete floor was a dark, reddish-brown stain the size of a cow. But there was no one there. The place was abandoned. The 24-hour sign was a lie. A sick joke. My frustration turned to ice in my veins. I turned to go back to my truck to get on the sat phone and call this whole stupid idea off. And that's when I saw it. on the dusty side of my trailer where the light from the bare bulb hit it just right. A handprint. A perfect 5-fingered handprint, outlined in the thick dust. It was low on the trailer, maybe only 3 feet off the ground. But that wasn't the part that made my blood run cold. The handprint was facing the wrong way. The thumb was on the right side, where the pinky should be. It was a left hand, pressed flat against my trailer, but the print was from the inside. I stared at it, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It was impossible. My trailer was a sealed reefer unit, locked and tagged at the depot in El Paso. I hauled medical supplies, temperature sensitive. No one gets in or out without breaking a federal seal. I walked to the back of the trailer, my boots crunching on the gravel. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the dead silence. The heavy steel latch was in place. The thick, numbered security tag was unbroken, gleaming faintly in the beam of my flashlight. It had to be a prank. That was the only explanation. Some kid at a rest stop back in Van Horn must have done it. Yeah, they must have had some kind of weird stamp, or they were contortionists. It was a stupid, childish prank. That's what I told myself. It had to be. I tried to laugh it off, but the sound caught in my throat, dry and hollow. I backed away from the trailer, away from that impossible handprint, my flashlight beam shaking. I tried to rationalize it, to stuff it into a box labeled weird but explainable. But the image was burned into my mind. A handprint from the inside of a sealed container. It was a message, a warning, and it meant that whatever was out here with me wasn't just watching anymore. It had already touched my world. It was already inside. The sight of that impossible handprint shattered my confidence. The flimsy logic I'd built, the mirage, the prank, crumbled into dust. This wasn't a string of bad luck. This was something else. My only thought was to get back to Gus and Billy, to get all 3 of our rigs turned around and back on the interstate, even if we had to drag Billy's truck 10 miles. To hell with the bonus, to hell with the schedule. I scrambled back into my cab, my hands fumbling for the keys. The leather of the seat felt cold, alien. The familiar smell of diesel and stale coffee was gone, replaced by the faint, cloying scent of something like rust and old meat. I fired up the engine, the roar of the Cummins a welcome thunder in the oppressive silence. I didn't even bother trying to turn around in the tight lot. I just threw the rig into reverse, planning to back out onto the highway. My mirrors were useless, showing nothing but pitch black. I relied on instinct, twisting in my seat to look out the back window. The trailer groaned as I backed it out, the tires crunching over the loose gravel. Then came a sound, a deep, resonant thump that I felt through the whole frame of the truck. I slammed on the brakes. The rig jolted to a halt, the air brakes hissing in protest. I hadn't hit anything. There was nothing back there but empty road. I peered into the darkness, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. Nothing. I put the truck in first gear, ready to pull forward and get the hell out of there. The engine revved, but the truck didn't move. I gave it more fuel. The RPMs climbed, the engine screamed, but the wheels wouldn't turn. It felt like the trailer was anchored to the ground. I tried reverse again. Nothing. The transmission whined a high, tortured sound, but we were stuck fast. What in the hell? I muttered, my voice a raw whisper. I set the parking brake, grabbed my mag light again, and jumped back down onto the gravel, my boots hitting the ground with a thud. I ran to the back of the trailer, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic path through the darkness. And then I saw it. The cause of the thump. The reason I was stuck. The rear axle of my trailer, a solid piece of steel thicker than my arm, was sitting on the ground. Both tires on the driver's side were gone. Not flat, not blown, vanished. The heavy steel wheels, the lug nuts, the massive rubber tires, all of it just gone. The hub was scraped raw where it had dug into the asphalt. My flashlight beam trembled, dancing over the impossible sight. You don't just lose 2 wheels. An entire dual axle setup doesn't just fall off. Not without a sound like a bomb going off. Not without leaving a trail of wreckage. There was nothing, just the raw, empty hub and the crippled trailer sagging on its frame. My breath came in ragged gasps. This was a trap. The sign for the garage, the isolation, it was all a setup. They, whoever they were, had led me here. They had waited for me to stop to get out. And in those few minutes I was peering into that derelict garage, they had dismantled my rig with impossible speed and silence. My escape route was gone. My truck, my home, my fortress, it was a cage. And I was trapped in it. Panic clawed at my throat. I had to warn Gus and Billy. I scrambled back up into the cab, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grab the CB microphone. I thumbed the button. Goose? Billy, come back. Do you read me? Static. Nothing but the hiss of an empty channel. Goose. It's a trap. Get out of here. Turn back. Can anyone hear me? I switched channels, running through them one by one. Static, static, the faint bleed of a Mexican radio station, then more static. The CB was dead, or jammed. I looked at the unit. The channel display was lit. The power was on. It should have been working. We were only 10, maybe 12 miles apart. A clear night like this, I should have been able to reach 50 miles, easy. The isolation was absolute. No truck, no radio, no town. I was stranded, crippled, and whatever had done this to my rig was still out there in the dark. The false hope of Sal's garage, my foolish attempt to fix things myself. It had all been a lie, a lure to pull me off the main road and into this dead space where the rules of the world didn't seem to apply. I was no longer a trucker on a long haul. I was prey, and I had just realized I was in the hunter's killing ground. There was no turning back. There was no going forward. There was only the darkness and the silent, patient enemy that now owned it. The silence that followed the death of my CB was different. It wasn't just an absence of sound anymore. It was a presence. It pressed in on the cab, heavy and suffocating. My world had shrunk to the dimensions of my Peterbilt, a steel and glass box sitting crippled in a pool of its own light. Every rational explanation had been stripped away, leaving only the raw, terrifying truth. This wasn't random. This was intelligent, deliberate. I killed the headlights, plunging myself into darkness. My thinking was primal. If I can't see them, maybe they can't see me. It was a fool's hope, and I knew it. They hadn't needed light to take my wheels. The darkness was their element, not mine. My eyes slowly adjusted, the faint starlight revealing the jagged silhouette of the distant mesas against a charcoal sky. The world outside my windows was a vast, empty stage, and I was the only actor on it. Or so I prayed. My mind raced, tried to piece together the events. The phantom charger that only I seemed to see clearly. The precise, sudden failure of Billy's engine. The perfectly placed lure of the fake garage. The surgical, silent removal of my wheels. This wasn't the work of some backwoods degenerates looking to steal cargo. The precision was too great, the methods too quiet, too impossible. Stealing a set of dual tires off a loaded trailer would take a heavy-duty jack, an impact wrench that screamed like a banshee, and at least 20 minutes of hard labor. They had done it in less than 5, without a sound. This was something else. An ancient evil? The thought felt insane, like something out of a late-night horror movie. But what other word fit? The rules here were different. The laws of physics, of time and sound, seemed to be bending around whatever was hunting us. I fumbled for the handle of my tire thumper, a solid piece of hickory I kept wedged beside my seat. It felt flimsy, pathetic, but it was better than nothing. I sat there in the dark, straining my ears, every nerve ending screaming. For an hour, nothing happened. The silence stretched, tightening my nerves like piano wire. Maybe they were gone. Maybe they had done what they came to do and left me here to rot. Then I heard it, a soft, rhythmic scratching sound. It was coming from outside, near the passenger side door. Scrapey, scrapey, scrapey. It was slow, deliberate, like a fingernail being dragged across the polished aluminum of my fuel tank. My blood turned to ice. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. The sound was methodical, patient. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was the sound of something marking its territory. And my truck was the territory. The scratching stopped. The silence rushed back in, somehow more menacing than the sound it replaced. I held my breath, listening, waiting. And then a new sound, a soft, wet tapping on the passenger side window right next to my head. Tap, tap, tap. My head snapped around, my eyes wide in the gloom, trying to see a shape, a shadow, anything, but there was only the reflection of the starlit sky in the glass. Tap, 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 tap. It was a rhythm, a code. My mind, frantic with fear, latched onto it. Morse code? No, that wasn't it. It was simpler. Shave and a haircut. The childish rhythm. Tap, 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 tap. And my brain, against all will, supplied the last two notes. 2 bits. A wave of nausea washed over me. This wasn't just a force. It was a personality. A sick, playful intelligence that was toying with me. It knew the old rhythms. It knew the old jokes. It was communicating, telling me it was right there, just inches away, separated only by a 1/4 inch of safety glass. It knew I was alone. It knew I was terrified. And then I saw it. For a split second, something blotted out the stars in the window. A shape. It was tall, impossibly thin, and it was bent at a sickeningly unnatural angle to bring its face level with my window. I didn't see features. I saw only a void. A patch of darkness more profound than the night around it. A shape that seemed to absorb the light and give nothing back. And from that shape came the tapping, a wet, fleshy sound like a finger with no bone behind it. I screamed, a raw, ragged sound torn from my throat. I threw myself back against my own door, scrambling away from the window, away from that thing. The tire thumper fell from my numb fingers and clattered to the floor. The tapping stopped. The shape was gone. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this was just the beginning. It had shown itself. It had announced its presence. The game had changed. It wasn't just hunting me anymore. It was introducing itself, and it was enjoying my fear. The thing at the window vanished, but its presence lingered, a greasy film of terror coating the inside of my cab. I couldn't stay there. The Peterbilt had gone from a fortress to a coffin, and the tapping on the glass was the sound of the lid being nailed shut. My only hope, the last flickering ember of chance, lay 10 miles back down that lightless highway with Gus and Billy. Together, we were 3. Alone, I was just a dead man waiting for the paperwork to be filed. My satellite phone. The thought hit me like a jolt of electricity. In my panic over the CB, I'd completely forgotten about it. It was my one link to the outside world, a direct line to sanity. I kept it in a hard case tucked behind the passenger seat. My hands, still trembling, fumbled for the latches. I flipped it open, the screen lighting up with a comforting green glow. Signal strength, for bars. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made me dizzy, washed over me. I had to be smart about this. Calling 911 felt inadequate. What would I say? There's a tall, skinny thing that taps like a cartoon, knocking on my window. They'd send a single highway patrol car in an hour, and the deputy would think I was drunk or high. He'd become another victim. No, I needed to call the one person who might just understand the gravity of the situation, the one person who knew these roads and the strange stories that clung to them like morning fog. I needed to call Gus. His number was 3rd on my speed dial. I pressed the button, my thumb hovering over the green send icon. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my voice to sound like a man in control, not a man falling apart. I pressed send. The phone beeped, and the screen read dialing. It rang once, twice. My heart pounded with each ring. Come on, Gus, pick up. Pick up, you old cuss. On the 3rd ring, he answered, but it wasn't his voice. Hello. The voice was young, alert, professional. It was the voice of a cop. My blood ran cold. Who is this? I demanded, my own voice a hoarse whisper. Where's Gus? This is Deputy Miller, Culberson County Sheriff's Department. To whom am I speaking? The voice was calm, but there was an underlying tension to it. This is Ray Peterson. I'm Gus's partner. We're in a convoy. What's going on? Where is he? Is he okay? There was a pause on the other end of the line. I heard the crackle of a police radio in the background. Sir, I'm afraid I have some bad news. We found your friend's vehicle abandoned about a half hour ago. Engine's cold, doors wide open, no sign of the driver. Abandoned? Gus would never abandon his rig, not unless he was dragged from it. And the other truck? The one with the blown engine? Billy, another pause, longer this time. The deputy cleared his throat. Sir, there's only one other truck here. A Kenworth. Its radiator hose is burst, but it's empty, too. We found the driver's side door open and a pool of, well, sir, we're treating this as a potential crime scene. There was no third truck at this location. My mind refused to accept the words. What are you talking about? My Peterbilt. I was right there with them. I drove ahead to get help. Sir, with all due respect, the deputy's voice became firm, bordering on suspicious. There are no tracks here. No sign that a third heavy rig has been on this shoulder tonight. Where are you calling from, Mr. Peterson? I was stammering now, the words tumbling out of my mouth in a frantic, incoherent flood. I'm on Highway 54, at an old garage. My truck is disabled. Something took my wheels. It's out here. You have to understand, something is hunting us. Calm down, sir, the deputy said, his voice taking on that placating tone people use for hysterics and lunatics. Just give me your location. Highway 54, you say? Near what mile marker? There are no markers. I yelled, my voice cracking. Just a sign. Oro Grande. Sal's garage. The silence on the other end of the line was the most terrifying thing I had heard all night. It stretched for 5, 10, 15 seconds. When the deputy finally spoke, his voice was completely different. It was flat, cold, and devoid of any emotion. Sir, there is no town named Oro Grande in this county. There has never been a Sal's garage on Highway 54. You're mistaken. I'm not mistaken. I screamed, desperation making my voice shrill. I'm looking at the sign right now. That's impossible, the deputy said, his voice dropping to a low, chilling whisper. You listen to me very carefully. You turn your engine on, and you drive. You drive as fast as you can, and you don't stop until you hit the interstate. Do you understand me? I can't. I told you my wheels are gone. The line went quiet again, but it wasn't empty. I could hear something, a faint, rhythmic sound in the background on his end. Top, 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 top. The sound of a wet finger on glass. The deputy's breath hitched. A choked, terrified gasp. Oh God, he whispered. It knows you called. The line went dead. The dead satellite phone felt as cold as a tombstone in my hand. The deputy's last words echoed in the cab, a death knell for the hope that had flared just moments before. It knows you called. The line hadn't just been cut. It had been severed by the same terror that had me in its grip. The tapping I heard hadn't been a memory. It was on his end, at his window. That thing, that impossible, silent predator, it wasn't just in one place. It was with me, and it was with him miles away. The trap wasn't the road. It was the whole damn county. A new kind of fear took hold, colder and sharper than the blind panic from before. The deputy, my one potential lifeline, wasn't just an unreliable ally. He had been compromised. He hadn't dismissed me as a crank. He had believed me, and that belief had marked him. In my desperation, I hadn't just failed to get help. I had led the monster straight to someone else. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I was poisoned. My brief, desperate escape attempt had failed catastrophically. I was still trapped, still crippled, but now I was also responsible for whatever was happening to that deputy. My isolation was complete. There was no one to call. No one was coming. Gus and Billy were gone, their trucks sitting like hollowed-out carcasses on the side of the road. I was utterly, irrevocably alone. My survival instinct, the primal core of me that had been screaming for an hour, shifted gears. Panic gave way to a grim, focused paranoia. I had one asset left, my rig. It was immobile, yes, but it was 40 tons of steel, a defensible position if I could just think. My mind raced through an inventory. Fuel, over half a tank. Batteries, fully charged. I had food in the mini fridge, water in jugs. I had my tire thumper, and I had the truck itself. A crazy, desperate idea began to form. If I couldn't drive away, I would have to make my stand here. But I couldn't just sit and wait for it to tap on my window again. I had to change the equation. I killed the interior dome light and slid silently from the driver's seat into the sleeper berth. The small space, usually a comforting refuge, felt like a bunker. I crawled to the small refrigerator, my movements slow and deliberate. I pulled out a half-empty carton of milk and a bottle of mustard. It wasn't about the food. It was about the container. I poured the milk out onto the floorboards, the white liquid pooling in the dark. I didn't care. I needed the carton. Then I went to work. Using the small knife from my multi-tool, I carefully cut the top off the cardboard milk carton. I moved to the front of the cab, keeping low, below the level of the windows. My hands found the emergency flare kit under the passenger seat. I pulled out 2 of the thick, red flares. Next, I unclipped the heavy-duty fire extinguisher from its mounting on the back wall of the cab. My plan was insane, a Hail Mary born of pure terror, but it was a plan. I was going to turn my cab into a trap. I placed 1 flare on the dashboard, pointing towards a driver's side window. I wedged the second one against the passenger seat, aimed at the other window. Then I took the now empty milk carton and positioned it on the floor, right in the center of the cab. I unscrewed the nozzle from the fire extinguisher hose and carefully poured a small amount of the fine, white powder, monoammonium phosphate, into the carton. It was a chemical irritant designed to smother fire, but in an enclosed space, it would choke anything that breathed. The last part was the trigger. I took the heaviest syringe from my toolkit and tied it to a length of twine I cut from the curtain pole. I ran the twine from the wrench, which I balanced precariously on the edge of the driver's seat, looped it around the gear shift, and then tied the other end to the pin of the fire extinguisher. The idea was simple and stupidly fragile. If that door opened, the wrench would fall, pulling the pin. I would then have seconds to grab the extinguisher, flood the cab with chemical dust, and hope it would disorient whatever came inside long enough for me to do something. I didn't know what the final step was. Bash it with the extinguisher itself? Scramble out the other door? I didn't have that part figured out. Just as I finished setting my pathetic little booby trap, a new sound came from outside. It was a sound I knew, a sound that had no place on this dead highway. It was the low, rumbling growl of a heavy diesel engine. Headlights swept across the gravel lot, illuminating the inside of my cab for a brief, terrifying second. They weren't police lights. They were the high, wide-set lights of a semi-truck. My heart leaped into my throat. Hope, that stupid, stubborn bastard, flickered again. Was it another trucker? Someone who had taken this godforsaken detour by chance? The truck slowed, its engine braking with a familiar Jake brake roar that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It pulled up alongside my rig, close, its engine idling, a deep, reassuring thrum in the night. For a moment, I just stared, frozen. Then the passenger side door of the other truck swung open. A figure was silhouetted in the glow of his dashboard lights. It was a man, just a man. He leaned out. "Need a hand, driver?" A voice called out, friendly and deep. I was about to scream for help, to tell him everything. But something stopped me. The truck. I knew that truck. The custom chrome exhaust stacks, the row of amber lights along the roof. It was Gus's rig, and standing in the open doorway, leaning out into the night, wasn't Gus. It was a tall, unnaturally thin man wearing my friend's favorite flannel jacket. And he was smiling a smile that was all teeth, a predatory grin that didn't reach his dark, hollow eyes. My betrayal wasn't that the deputy had been compromised. My betrayal was seeing my friend's truck, his life, being puppeteered by the very thing that had taken him. He hadn't just been taken. He had been replaced. The sight of Gus's truck, driven by that thing, shattered the last of my resolve. This wasn't a hunt anymore. This was a violation. It wasn't just killing us. It was taking our lives, our trucks, our very identities. The friendly greeting, "Need a hand, driver," was the cruelest mockery, a predator wearing the skin of its last meal. The hope I'd felt moments before curdled into a cold, heavy dread. The truck idling beside me wasn't a potential rescue. It was my hearse arriving for a premature pickup. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I shrank back into the shadows of my sleeper berth, my heart hammering a frantic, silent rhythm against my ribs. The figure in Gus's doorway waited for a moment, its wide, unnatural grin fixed in the dim light. When no reply came, it simply chuckled, a low, dry, rattling sound like stones in a tin can, and swung the door shut. The engine of Gus's rig revved once, a deep-throated growl that felt possessive, proprietary. Then it pulled away. It didn't go back towards the interstate. It continued down Highway 54, deeper into the darkness, its taillights shrinking until they were two red sparks that winked out of existence. It was leading. It was showing me the way. The message was clear. Your friends are gone. Their world is mine now. And this is the road you must travel. For a long time, I just sat there paralyzed. The booby trap I'd so frantically constructed seemed pathetic, a child's game against an enemy that could steal a man's truck and wear his jacket. But what choice did I have? I was still stranded. My phone was a dead brick. My radio was silent. And now I knew for certain that turning back was not an option. The only way out was forward. My thoughts turned to my wheels. How could I fix them? I couldn't. Not alone. I had a spare, but I didn't have the jack or the tools to lift a loaded trailer and mount two new tires. But maybe I didn't need to. An idea, born of pure mechanical desperation, started to take shape. The drive axles on the tractor were fine. It was the trailer that was crippled. What if I didn't need the trailer? Deadheading, driving without a trailer attached. It was possible. Dangerous, but possible. The fifth wheel, the big, greasy coupling that held the tractor and trailer together, was a complex mechanism of locking jaws and safety pins. Releasing it was a physical, dirty job that usually required level ground and no tension on the kingpin. I had neither, but it was the only move I had left on the board. Fueled by a new, desperate energy, I slid out of my cab. This time, I didn't just take my mag light. I took the tire thumper and stuck in my belt. The air outside was still and cold. The derelict garage of Sal's loomed in the dark, a silent monument to my stupidity. I ignored it. I had work to do. I crawled under the rig, the gravel biting into my hands and knees. The space was tight, smelling of diesel, road grime, and my own fear. I found a fifth wheel release handle. It was a thick, steel rod with a small loop on the end. Pulling it would release the locking jaws that held the trailer's kingpin. Under normal circumstances, it took a good, hard yank. Now, with the back of the trailer sagging and putting all its weight at an angle, the pin was bound tight. I pulled. Nothing. The handle didn't budge. I braced my feet against the drive shaft and pulled again, my muscles screaming in protest. The metal groaned, but it wouldn't release. It was fused together by thousands of pounds of misaligned pressure. I was right back where I started. Trapped. I lay there for a moment, panting, the taste of failure coppery in my mouth. Defeated. And that's when I saw it. My flashlight beam, dancing around in my frustration, caught something on the underside of my trailer. It was a small, metal plaque, riveted to the frame, something I hadn't noticed in 1,000 previous inspections. It was an asset tag, put there by the trailer's manufacturer. But beneath the serial number, someone had scratched something into the metal with a sharp object. A symbol, a circle with a vertical line drawn through it, and 3 horizontal lines crossing the vertical one. It looked like some kind of bizarre runic cross. I stared at it, a cold dread washing over me. I had seen that symbol before, not scratched on my trailer, but hanging from a rearview mirror. It was on a cheap, wooden air freshener. In Billy's truck. I'd ribbed him about it when we started the run, asked him if it was from some new age gift shop. He just shrugged and said it was a good luck charm from his hometown. A little place out in the middle of nowhere. A town he said was the friendliest, safest place in the world. A town called Oro Grande. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Billy wasn't a random victim. He was from here. The breakdown, the good luck charm, the suggestion for the route. Had he been in on it? Or was he the first sacrifice, a lamb leading the others to slaughter? This wasn't just a trap I'd stumbled into. This was a destination. The fake garage wasn't the center of the web. The town itself was. The safe haven Billy had described wasn't a sanctuary. It was the heart of the trap. And Gus's truck, driven by that thing in his jacket, wasn't just leading me into the dark. It was showing me the way home. The world tilted on its axis. Oro Grande. It wasn't just a lure. It was the source. Billy, sweet, dumb, 20-something Billy, with his goofy grin and his first brand new rig, was he a Judas goat? Or was his hometown a kind of hereditary curse he couldn't escape? One that had finally come to collect him and anyone unfortunate enough to be riding alongside him? The question hammered in my brain, but it didn't matter. The end result was the same. I was being herded. Exhaustion, a deep, soul-crushing weariness began to settle over me. It was more than just lack of sleep. It was the constant, high-pitched thrum of adrenaline, the mental toll of trying to make sense of the senseless. My thoughts grew muddy, my reactions slow. I crawled out from under the rig, my body aching, my mind a fog of terror and confusion. The failed attempt to release the fifth will had drained my physical strength, and the revelation about Billy had crippled me mentally. I stumbled back to my cab, collapsing into the driver's seat. I had to think. I had to formulate a new plan. But my brain felt like a dead engine. I stared out the windshield into the oppressive dark. The image of that runic cross burned into my vision. The symbol of Oro Grande. The brand of this place. I must have blacked out. Not sleep, but a gray, fuzzy slide into unconsciousness, my body finally shutting down against my will. When I came to, it was with a violent jolt. Something was wrong. The silence. The engine was off. I hadn't turned it off. I never would have turned it off. The low, life-giving rumble was gone, and the silence it left behind was absolute and terrifying. I frantically turned the key in the ignition. Nothing. Not even a click from the solenoid. The dashboard was dark. I flicked the headlight switch. Nothing. The batteries were dead. Completely drained. It was impossible. They were brand new, top of the line, and had been fully charged. It would take hours of leaving the lights on to drain them, and even then, they'd have enough juice to make the gauges flicker. This was a complete, instantaneous power failure. My last defense was gone. My pathetic booby trap was useless without the power to the cab lights to signal an intrusion. The truck was now just a cold, dead hunk of metal. Another layer of my security stripped away silently while I was lost to exhaustion. It was a critical mistake. I had let my guard down for a moment, and they had used it to bleed my fortress dry. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the fog of my fatigue. I was blind, deaf, and powerless. I fumbled for my mag light, its strong beam a pathetic comfort. I shone on the fuel gauge. Still half a tank. They hadn't taken the fuel. They'd taken the spark. It was another message. We can touch you whenever we want. We can let you have your fuel, your walls, your illusion of safety. But the lifeblood, the power to resist, we can take that away in a blink. I sat there in the dead cab, the smell of my own fear thick in the air. How long had I been out? Minutes? An hour? What else had they done while I was unconscious? The thought sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I swept the beam of the flashlight around the interior of the cab. Everything seemed to be in its place. The smashed milk carton, the fire extinguisher, my tire thumper. Then the light fell on the passenger seat. My logbook was sitting there, flipped open. I never leave my logbook open. It's a professional sin. I leaned over, my light shaking. It was open to today's entry. My neat, methodical script detailed the start of the run from El Paso, the checkpoints, the fuel stops. But at the bottom of the page, underneath my last entry, there was new writing. It wasn't mine. The letters were jagged, spidery, scratched into the paper as if by a claw. It was a single sentence. We are so excited for you to join the family. My stomach churned. I slammed the book shut as if it were radioactive. They had been in the cab with me. While I was passed out, mere feet away, one of them had sat in my passenger seat, opened my book, and written me a welcome note. The violation was so profound, so intimate, it felt worse than a physical assault. They hadn't harmed me. They didn't need to. They were showing me how helpless I was. They were savoring this. The psychological destruction came first. The true nature of this cage wasn't just that I was trapped on a road. It was that there was no barrier between their world and mine. They could get in any time they wanted. The door wasn't locked. It had never even been closed. The message in my logbook was a final push. It broke the dam of my sanity. The quiet, creeping dread exploded into a firestorm of pure animal panic. They'd been in the cab. They'd been beside me while I slept, breathing the same air, their alien presence filling the small space. The truck wasn't a shelter. It was a display case, and I was the exhibit. I had to get out. Staying in the cab was suicide. It was like waiting for a spider to finish its web around you. I grabbed my mag light and the tire thumper, threw the door open, and scrambled out into the night, landing hard on the gravel. I didn't have a plan. I just ran. I ran away from my dead truck, away from the mocking sign of the fake garage, into the open desert that bordered the highway. My feet sank into the soft sand, my boots clumsy and heavy. The spiny arms of creosote bushes clawed at my jeans. I ran blindly, fueled by a terror so profound it blocked out all thought. The only instinct was distance. Get away, get away, get away. The darkness was absolute, a thick, starless blanket now that my eyes were no longer adjusted. My flashlight beam bobbed and weaved crazily, illuminating a chaotic kaleidoscope of sand, rock, and thorny brush. I didn't get far, maybe 50 yards. My foot caught on a submerged rock, and I went down hard, my face plowing into the coarse sand. The impact knocked the wind out of me. My mag light flew from my grasp and skittered across the ground, its beams spinning like a pinwheel before coming to rest pointing back the way I'd come. And that's when I saw them. They were standing on the highway, beside my crippled rig. 3 of them. They weren't hiding anymore. They were revealed in the stark, lonely beam of my flashlight. They were tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen, and thin to the point of emaciation, their limbs like sticks wrapped in tight, pale skin. They wore remnants of clothing, a flannel jacket I recognized as Gus's, a t-shirt that might have been Billy's, other scraps of fabric that were just dark, ragged patches. Their forms were wrong, bent at angles that a human skeleton shouldn't allow. They stood perfectly still, their heads cocked as they watched me, the sole beam of light catching the wet shine of their eyes. They had no features to speak of, no nose, no mouth I could see, just smooth, pale expanses of skin where a face should be. But the eyes, they were huge, black, and depthless like pools of crude oil. My breath hitched in my throat. I was completely exposed, lying on the ground, my one source of light pointed directly at my enemies, perfectly illuminating me for them. I tried to scramble back, to get to my feet, but my limbs felt like lead. My panic flight had been a fool's errand. I hadn't been escaping. I had just been running to the end of my leash. One of them took a step forward. It didn't walk like a person. It moved with a smooth, silent grace that was utterly terrifying, its long legs covering the ground with an unnatural speed. It flowed from the asphalt into the desert, closing the distance between us in seconds. It wasn't running. It was just arriving. It stopped 10 feet from me. It tilted its head, that featureless face aimed right at me. And then a sound came from it. Not a voice. It was a high-pitched, chittering sound, like 1,000 insects trapped in a jar. It was a sound of inquiry, of curiosity. And as it made the noise, a thin, black line appeared on its face, splitting it horizontally. It widened into a grotesque smile, a slash of darkness filled with what looked like rows of tiny, needle-like teeth. It took another step, then another. It was closing in for the final move. My truck was dead. My friends were gone, or worse, they were part of them. I was alone in the desert, unarmed, my final, panicked bolt for freedom having led me right into their grasp. The tire thumper was still in my belt, a useless stick of wood. This was it, the absolute bottom. Cornered, helpless, and face to face with the impossible things that had been toying with me all night. There was no escape. The game was over. They had won. The thing loomed over me, blotting out the stars, its chittering sound filling the world as it reached down with a long, 3-fingered hand. The thing's hand, pale and spidery, reached for my face. Its touch was going to be the last thing I ever felt. My life didn't flash before my eyes. There was only the chittering sound, the smell of dust and ozone, and the sight of that lipless, needle-toothed smile. My mind, stripped of all hope, went completely blank. And in that void, a single forgotten detail flickered. A tiny, insignificant memory from what felt like a lifetime ago, back on the interstate, just before the phantom charger appeared. It was Gus. He'd been complaining. About the load. Not the weight, but the cargo itself. Medical supplies. He'd grumbled over the CB. Hate hauling this stuff. Gives me the creeps. All that high-tech gear. Half of it's just fancy ways to keep a body going long after it should have quit. Cryo coolers, defibrillators, all that junk. It ain't natural. cryocoolers, my reefer unit. It wasn't hauling vaccines or blood plasma. It was hauling highly specialized, top-of-the-line medical equipment. My mind, grabbing onto this single thread in the darkness, followed it. The handprint. The impossible handprint from the inside of my sealed trailer. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't a warning. It was a plea. Someone, or something, was inside my trailer. Something alive. Something that had been put there before I ever signed for the load. And these things out here in the desert, they weren't hunting me. Not primarily. I was just the container. They were hunting what was inside my truck. The handprint, the silent disabling of my rig, the psychological warfare, wasn't just to terrorize me. It was to stop the truck, to get it open, to retrieve the prize. And the final piece clicked into place with the force of shotgun blast. The power drain. They hadn't just drained the batteries on my tractor. My trailer was a reefer unit. Its cooling system ran on its own diesel generator, but it drew its starting power from the tractor's electrical system. When they killed my batteries, they didn't just kill my engine and my lights. They killed the reefer. The cold that flooded my veins was no longer fear. It was a terrifying, crystalline certainty. They weren't trying to break into the trailer. They were waiting for the temperature inside to rise, waiting for whatever was in that cryo cooler to thaw out, to weaken, to die. They weren't strong enough or brave enough to face it at full power. They were scavengers, waiting for the lion to succumb to the heat before they moved in to feast. This realization didn't give me a plan, but it gave me a weapon. It gave me leverage. The thing's hand was inches from my face. The chittering intensified, a sound of imminent triumph. My terror hadn't vanished, but now it was welded to something else. A cold, desperate, incandescent rage. They had taken my friends. They had wrecked my truck. They had terrorized me to the brink of madness. And it was all a sideshow. I was just the goddamn delivery boy caught in the middle of a war I couldn't comprehend. You want what's in the box? I rasped, my voice a broken croak. The words were for me, not for it. A declaration. The thing paused, its head tilted, the chittering sound sputtering for a moment. Did it understand? Or did it just register the shift in my tone from prey to something else? I didn't wait to find out. In one convulsive, desperate movement, I twisted my body, ignoring the scream of my muscles. I yanked the tire thumper from my belt. It wasn't a weapon against the creature. It was a tool. I wasn't fighting it. I was fighting for my trailer. I slammed the heavy hickory club down, not at the creature, but at my own mag light on the ground beside me. The plastic housing shattered, the bulb exploded in a flash of light, and the world was plunged back into total, absolute darkness. For a split second, there was silence. Then, a sound of pure fury erupted from the creature beside me, a piercing, high-frequency shriek that tore through the night. It had been exposed, and it hadn't liked it. And now, its advantage was gone. We were both blind, but I knew the way back to my truck. And I knew, with a sudden, chilling insight, exactly what I had to do. The weakness of this ancient, terrifying enemy wasn't silver bullets or holy water. Its weakness was impatience, and I was about to use that against it. The shriek of the creature in the darkness was my starting gun. I scrambled backward on all fours, sand flying, my senses screaming. The creature was disoriented, enraged by the sudden plunge into blindness. It gave me the head start I needed. I found my feet and ran, not deeper into the desert, but straight back toward the highway, back towards my dead Peterbilt. Every step was a gamble. I expected long, pale fingers to clamp down on my shoulder at any second. The memory of their unnatural speed was seared into my brain. But the darkness was my ally now. It hid me, masked my clumsy, panicked retreat. I burst out of the scrub and onto the blessed solidity of the asphalt, my boots pounding on the pavement. The silhouettes of the other two creatures were gone, swallowed by the night. Maybe they'd scattered when the light died. Maybe they were flanking me. I didn't have time to care. I reached my truck, my hands finding the familiar shape of the driver's side door. I fumbled it open and hauled myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. The click of the latch was the most reassuring sound in the world. I was back in my steel box. It was dead, but it was solid. My breath came in ragged, burning gasps. The terror was still there, a high-voltage current humming just beneath my skin, but the cold resolve held firm. They wanted what was in my trailer. They were waiting for it to thaw. That meant I had a timetable. And it meant the contents of that trailer were my only bargaining chip, my only weapon. My mind, sharpened by adrenaline and newfound purpose, worked with a frantic clarity. I couldn't move the truck. I couldn't call for help. I couldn't fight them head on. So I had to change the playing field. I had to force them to act. I had to make waiting for the thaw more dangerous for them than opening the box themselves. I rummaged in the side pocket of the driver's door, my fingers searching for a small plastic case. I found it, a book of paper matches from a diner in Phoenix. I always kept them just in case. Next, I turned my attention to the floor of the cab. I had a full half tank of diesel, over 70 gallons of fuel sitting in the aluminum tanks right under my doors. Diesel isn't as volatile as gasoline, but it burns hot and long. I grabbed the multi-tool from my belt and, using the pliers, I unscrewed the cap on the small bleed valve at the base of my seat, a maintenance port for the air ride system I never used. A thin stream of compressed air hissed out. It wouldn't be much, but it would be a start. My plan was forming a desperate, suicidal symphony of mechanics and mayhem. I didn't have the power to restart the reefer unit, to make the cargo safe again. So I would do the opposite. I would accelerate the thaw. I would turn my trailer into an oven. I worked with a feverish intensity. I ripped open the sleeper curtain, tearing the cheap fabric into long strips. I took one of the strips and my tire thumper and climbed out of the cab again, my heart pounding. I moved to the side of the truck, my back pressed against the cold metal, listening. The desert was silent again, but it was a listening silence. They were out there, watching, waiting. I located the fuel cap on the massive tank beneath my door. I unscrewed it. The smell of diesel was thick and potent. I fed one end of the fabric strip deep into the tank, letting it soak up the fuel. The rest I let dangle, a long, dark fuse. This was the point of no return. The final gamble. I was going to set my own rig on fire. Not the whole thing. I was going to create a control burn right under the reefer unit. The heat would travel up the metal walls of the trailer, raising the inside temperature exponentially faster than the ambient night air ever could. It would force their hand. They would either have to risk the fire and the heat to rip open the trailer now, or they would lose their prize to the flames entirely. They'd have to come to me. I crept back to the cab door, the diesel-soaked rag in my hand. My heart was a frantic drum. This was insanity. My truck was my life, my home, my entire net worth. And I was about to destroy it, based on a half-cocked theory about a handprint and a dead man's grumblings. But it was the only move I had left. I was betting my life that what was inside that trailer was more valuable to them than I was, and that they were more afraid of it than they were of fire. I pulled out the book of matches. My hand was shaking so badly it took 3 tries to strike one. The tiny flame sputtered to life, a fragile orange jewel in the infinite dark. It reflected in my wide, terrified eyes. The final wager was on the table. All I had to do was drop the match. I didn't hesitate. The moment the match flared, I dropped it onto the diesel-soaked rag. It didn't explode. It caught with a deep whoosh, a greedy orange flame that licked up the side of the fuel tank and began to crawl along the fabric fuse. I scrambled back into the cab and slammed the door, my eyes locked on the growing fire in my side mirror. It wasn't a blaze yet, just a hungry, determined flame eating its way along the cloth, heading for the underside of my trailer. The effect on the creatures was instantaneous and dramatic. A chorus of those high-frequency shrieks erupted from the darkness, a sound of pure panic and fury. The waiting game was over. I had thrown the chessboard into the fire. I saw movement in my other mirror. A pale, stick-like shape darted across the highway, then another. They were converging on the trailer. No more stealth. No more psychological games. This was a frantic rush. The fire grew, catching on the grime and oil caked on the trailer's undercarriage. The orange glow illuminated the scene in flickering, hellish light. I could see them clearly now. 3 of them, clawing at the rear doors of my trailer. Their long, thin fingers, useless against the heavy steel latch, scraped impotently against the metal, sending showers of sparks into the night. One of them, the one wearing Gus's jacket, threw itself against the doors with a guttural scream of rage. The whole rig shook with the impact, but the federal seal, the heavy lock it held, they were strong, but they weren't strong enough. The fire was really taking hold now, smoke thick and black, boiling up and around the trailer. The heat was immense. I could feel it through the floor of the cab. And then, from inside the trailer, came a new sound. A low, resonant hum. It started soft, almost subliminal, but grew steadily in volume and pitch. It wasn't a mechanical sound. It was organic, alive. It was the sound of something waking up. The creatures outside heard it too. They froze, their frenzied attack on the doors stopping instantly. They drew back, their featureless faces turned towards the source of the hum, their posture shifting from aggression to absolute terror. They had miscalculated. The heat I'd applied hadn't just been thawing their prize. It had been a defibrillator, a shock to the system, jump-starting it back to life. What happened next will be burned into my memory until the day I die. The back doors of my trailer, the ones that had resisted the creature's frantic assault, blew outward with cataclysmic force. Not like they were unlocked, but like they were punched from the inside by something with impossible strength. The heavy steel doors were torn from their hinges and sent cartwheeling into the desert. The humming stopped. In the gaping, black maw of my ruined trailer, silhouetted against the roaring flames, a figure emerged. It was not human. It was tall, impossibly so, easily 9 feet, and clad in what looked like interlocking plates of smooth, cobalt blue armor that seemed to drink the firelight. It had no face, just a smooth, featureless helmet. It took a single step down from the trailer and landed on the asphalt with a soft thud that seemed to shake the ground. It stood there for a second, its head slowly scanning the scene. The 3 pale creatures were utterly paralyzed, seemingly frozen in place by a fear so profound it was a physical force. The armored being turned its head and fixed its attention on the one in Gus's jacket. It raised a hand encased in the same blue armor with long, elegant fingers. There was no weapon. There was no flash of light. But the pale creature simply came apart. It dissolved, its form collapsing into a cloud of shimmering dust and whispers that the wind caught and scattered into the night. Gus's flannel jacket fell to the asphalt, empty. The other 2 shrieked a final, desperate cry of terror and turned to flee. It didn't get 2 steps. The armored being turned its emotionless helmet towards them, and they too dissolved, their existence wiped away in an instant. It was over in 5 seconds. The armored being stood alone amidst the fire and the lingering dust of its enemies. It then turned its blank, terrifying gaze directly on my cab. On me. I was certain my heart stopped. This was not a rescue. This was pest control. I was the ant that had been scurrying around the feet of giants, and the exterminator had just arrived. It took a step towards my door, and then it stopped. It tilted its head, just as the other creatures had, but this was different. It felt like consideration, analysis. After a long, silent moment, it raised its hand again, not at me, but at the fire engulfing my rig. The flames just went out. 1 second they were a roaring inferno. The next, there was nothing but smoke and glowing embers. It had snuffed it out like a candle. It turned its gaze back to me one last time, and I felt a voice in my head. It wasn't sound. It was a thought, an idea, placed there with surgical precision. Container compromised. Asset preserved. Your role is concluded. Then, with the same impossible grace of the creatures it had just destroyed, it turned and walked into the desert. It didn't fade or vanish. It just walked, its tall, blue form growing smaller and smaller until the darkness simply swallowed it. I was left alone, in my dead, scorched, and broken truck, in the middle of nowhere. Alive. They found me at dawn. A highway patrolman, the real kind this time, saw the smoke. I didn't tell him the truth. I told him I'd had an electrical fire, that I'd been in a fugue state, that my partners had driven on without me. They put me in the back of his cruiser. They treated me like a victim, a man suffering from shock. As we drove away, I looked back at my Peterbilt one last time. My life, a blackened husk on the side of a forgotten road. I hadn't won. I hadn't even fought. I had just survived, A piece of collateral damage in a war that stretches across stars and hides in the empty spaces of the American landscape. I don't drive anymore. I can't stand the silence of an open road, because I know what's out there in the dark. I know who the real predators are. And I know we are nothing more than the containers they ship their cargo in. So if you're out there, driving late, and you see something that doesn't belong, don't be a hero. Don't investigate. Just keep the hammer down. Because you're not the hunter, and you are not the prey. You're just a box.